Hello. Today I'm going to tie for you what I'm calling a game changer, but a tube fly version. I've been experimenting with tube flies lately and recently tying bass flies, larger minnow type flies that I would use to catch smallmouth bass in the rivers near my home here in western Pennsylvania. And this is what I came up with. So I'm going to use for the back sections two pieces of tube. The smaller one will be the actual tail of this minnow, and there will be a slightly longer piece between the tail and the hook. So there'll be essentially three sections. I'll connect them together with some 30-pound braid that was kind of left over from a recent beach vacation where we did some surf fishing. So it seems to work well for this. It has just enough movement, but enough rigidity to kind of hold the pieces in line. I don't know. I haven't fished these a lot made this way, and I put together a couple different techniques and some components of two different, totally different types of flies, I guess. And I guess I was trying to avoid the cost of those metal segments that you use for game changers, and this was what I came up with. So you can see here we're starting some thread on the short piece of tubing. I've tied that um, braid on top. And the idea, I think, is I'm going to put the braid on top and then take the other end that's on the right side of the screen. I'm left-handed, so it comes out the right side. I'm going to come back up through the center of these tubes with that and then tie both ends and kind of double up on top of the hook. So that's what I did at first. After further review, I could have easily just looped it back and tied both pieces on top. I don't think anything's going to pull these apart, but there are toothy critters that chase minnows as well. So for the actual tail, I have two feathers back to back from a Chickabou, an olive barred, dark barred Chickabou pelt. I use it for a lot of these type of flies, so I think olive's kind of a magic color for a lot of these things. The original inclination was to tie one on each side, but that with the tube and the big diameter and so on, tying them both together on top and actually tying them in the center and kind of holding them into place as we wrap back over them is a little bit of a secret here too. So, and then a little dab of super glue, I think, because these are tubes. I was a little nervous about things coming loose or slipping or whatever. I don't think any of that really happens, but the super glue can't hurt. So next we'll gather up a piece of, this is a schlappen feather, and I'm going to take the smaller thin section off the tip and use it for the tail portion of this fly. And then I'll take the larger section of that schlappen feather and use it on the next segment. And I guess the idea here is to kind of get bigger as you move forward and kind of imitate the shape of the minnow to some degree. So this kind of all adds up as something. I mean, tube flies are, they seem to be full-bodied, and but they're tied sparse so that they move through the water, sink, and the fibers move around. So I was trying to incorporate some of that as well. And it was about here I realized, and I keep in mind I've only tied about three or four of these with this combination of stuff. So I'm making some of this up as I go, and there are slight differences in each one. So this is fly number three. So I know I heard the guys tying on the videos talking about, us YouTube folks that edit out all our mistakes. Well, um, I cut some of these pieces here, but for the most part, you're seeing it as I'm putting it together. So here we're going to do some dubbing. That's always the slow and boring part when it comes to watching these videos. So feel free to fast forward through this section. Um, my thinking here is that I'm going to make each section a lot like you do a woolly bugger, where you take the feather, put it in front, and leave a wire at the rear end of the segment, and then the wire is used to counter wrap over the hackle after it's been wound to the back end. So I didn't invent any of this. This is all been done before. So I just kind of put together this combination. This is how I did it, and Hopefully, as you see these things, you'll either see something I do well and learn from that, or you'll see something that looks a little bizarre and you'll say, I got a better way of doing that. So um, there we are. We'll pin down that hackle tip and wind forward. And I keep these kind of close together. Each one crosses the hackle, so if the tail gets chewed on a little bit, it should kind of remain intact. So here's a little trick. I caught myself doing this. I saw it on film, but I didn't realize I was doing it. I'm trapping the end of that wire down as I switch hands. I'm trapping it against the bobbin holder and until I can grab it again on the upper side. So I've seen that in my videos here, and it was one of those subconscious things I didn't really realize I was doing. So hope that helps some of you out. And then we're going to fight all this stuff kind of hanging around here and add a whip finish. And the braid kind of gets in the way a little bit, so I'm using some extra fingers to pull it out. I should have trimmed the wire first. I'm not sure why that's still there. You'll see a couple of things there. If I was really doing this in a good order and thinking my way through this, I might have done things different. So now we'll finally come back and snip out the wire. All right, so we'll take that tail section away. I guess I didn't capture it on video, but I did put a drop of super glue on that whip finish. And we'll set that aside. We'll put in the longer section. And here's another one of those things. You say, oh, now he's thinking. I noticed that I just grabbed the black thread and started right in with that. And after further review and dubbing the body and whatever, I think the lighter thread kind of blended with the dubbing a little better and matched the tube itself. So I switched to white, and I don't know if there's any magic there, but I thought it through afterwards, and that's where we are now. So, yeah, so here I'm trying to leave about an 1/8 inch space in between the the tube that is the tail and then this longer section here. And so I'm still tying that braid down on top. And we'll come back with a piece of this wire. And for whatever reason, I didn't expect this wire to be as um, stiff or springy as it was. But I fought this wire a little bit throughout the process, and I think maybe part of it's because I'm tying on the tube, but it has a little more memory and was a little tougher than I thought it was going to be. Maybe I'm used to working with copper. So same thing, wrap back over it and then back to the front. I'm gathering up that other half of that schluppan feather. And here I'm tying this in, and I'll tell you why I'm doing it. And then I think I've seen Kelly Gallup do it most recently, but when he ties the tips of these feathers in, he'll kind of do a cross. He'll touch the feather to the thread, cross over front to back, then back to front, and then pull it tight, throw a wrap around it. And that does really well on the small diameter of a hook. I had a couple of these pull out when I was trying to do it here on tubes or doing it on different tube flies. So that's why I wrap the stem down, and that's why I fight the annoyance of having that feather stick out kind of in the way as I'm wrapping. So I don't know if I probably could have done the cross wrap thing and added a feather in later, maybe with a few more wraps or something, but this is just how I chose to do it. So here we are at the dubbing, the longer, boring, time-consuming. Fast forward through this part. In fact, if you're like me, I hate to admit it, but I fast forward through a lot of videos. I look for those one or two key elements that someone's trying to share, and then I know I'm not a public speaker by any means, so some of the folks out there are fun to listen to, and probably others are maybe more like me. So if you got out your red pen and you're keeping notes and you're marking things wrong that I've done here, something I noticed kind of after the fact was I have a perfectly good material holder, and yet that piece of wire is just kind of hanging in space there. And I think it does get in the way later. So I'm not sure why I didn't catch that in the material holder in the spring behind the back on the vise. But so here we are. We'll fold the feather back and again fight that little piece of um, braid that's sticking out the front. Another thought there was I could have rolled that up a little bit and used a piece of painter's tape, one of the tips I've seen recently, and kind of made a little ball out of it so that it would have been less cumbersome. Again, there's probably, you guys are probably looking at this saying, well, I could do that a lot better. I think I'd rather add this. And I think that's part of the goal here too. Is I know I stand on the shoulders of others, and I'm hoping you guys are doing the same thing. So here we'll pull that wire around and trap the tip of the feather down. I think about 3 or 4 wraps in, I realized that I'm trapping some of those fibers, and I kind of want to pull them out a little bit. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think it changes. This fly's ugly, period, and I just hope it moves in a way that fish eat it, think it's something good to eat. So there I am. I'm kind of just off camera, but I'm using that same technique to kind of trap the wire against my bobbin holder there. That's the other thing. Any fibers going forward on these tube flies, it's like, who cares? I did mess around and pull them back a little bit, but they wouldn't interfere with anything. And I got a little smarter. I think I trimmed the wire before I did the whip finish. Okay, there's where I realized I got my money's worth when I bought that Schlappen. I was just going to break that feather off, but it was pretty tough. Now here I'm not clipping this because I'd probably take out too many fibers. I'm kind of just sawing it, holding the tip and sawing it with my scissors. And it's also about here I realized I didn't even trim the tip of the first feather I tied in, or the tip of this feather when I made the tail section. Kind of one thing I noticed after the fact too was I spent a lot of time pulling this thing around and preening it as I went, as if any of that really matters. But I guess when you realize it's on video, you're trying to make it look good. But all right, so now we're going to introduce another piece of fly. I'm going to put some dark olive marabou, kind of a little chunk or so on top. So here I just stripped a little off the side. The reason I show that is I want to mention something different later. And a couple of tips of working with marabou. And again, I didn't invent any of this. I've seen most of it. Um, kind of gravitated. They talk about breaking it off with your thumbnails and whatever. There you saw me pin it against from one finger to the other to flip it. So that's kind of a good idea. Here's the tip though that I was going to mention. So I'm using kind of a sharp edge, but it's the back edge of my snips there, and trapping the fibers against and kind of tearing them that way. I tried to tear them with my thumbnail, and I end up pulling them out of my fingers and things. It doesn't work as well. So I think that's a tip when it comes to trimming marabou and making it so it doesn't look cut, but you can still trim those. Sometimes it has those real thin, straggly ends on the tips, and you want to tear those off. So it's about here I realized that that braid is in the way again, and that was going to get wrapped down with the marabou as I was tying it in. So tying it with the tips forward and flipping it back builds a little bulk there, so which can't hurt because we're going to try and taper larger as we move from back to front. So here we're going to grab a chunk of white, kind of do the same thing, preen it, trim it, and tie it on the bottom. That should imitate the lighter belly on these minnows. And obviously it's too long, and you'll see we trim that out later too. So all right, so still fighting the braid a little bit, but get the top back, pull the bottom back, and that length on the bottom didn't hurt me because I think it helped me hold it out of the way. All right, and we'll tie this down and do our whip finish again. There's always one of those strands of marabou that wants to get in on the action there, so I think I only got about 2 or 3 turns in there, so I come back at it again and add a little more. And there again, I'm going to super glue this as well, so it shouldn't come untied. Oh, so I did heat the end of that braid with the lighter and make a little ball on the end. I didn't want it to fray throughout the process. Of course, that gets hung up on my tying thread more than once, so I'm not sure that was worth the effort. All right, so everything's out of the way. We're all tied down. So here, I'm not going to snip those fibers. I'm just kind of sawing at them, pulling them across the blade. I think if I would have dampened those fibers, they would have stayed out of the way a little better. And there we're adding that super glue that we talked about just to kind of keep things from coming undone. And I think when I was doing tube flies, I would have added the eyes right here, called this thing done. I might have used a little longer sections of tube. But my imagination and creativity got the best of me, and we went on to build what you're going to see here. All right, so now we're going to get that tube fly vise out of the Dynaking there, get a hook. This is my number 2 B10S Gamakatsu. Um, this is for the smallmouth bass and the size that we catch them, and even for largemouth when we cast off the boat and toward the shore here in like Lake Arthur near Pittsburgh where we go. Um, this hook seems to be ideal. There I did. So you might want to pause that to write that down if you hadn't seen those hooks before. So we'll start our thread and get a good thread base underneath. And here again, I'm going to add some super glue. I don't want anything to spin around too much and or pull loose. And off camera, I've done what I've mentioned before, but I took the other end of that braid and ran it up through the center of those tubes and kind of folded it pulled it up tight. So I'll be tying in two ends of braid here. One that came from the middle of the tube and one that was tied down on top. And the idea of tying them on top, I guess you could have just pulled this on all together with the with the braid itself, put a bead or something at the back end. But my thinking here was that using this the way we did, it'll keep things lined up. They won't twist as much, so the tail should stay oriented to match the fly. I'm not sure how that's going to work out after a few fish chew on it, but at least when I was able to tie it in and for the camera, I was able to line everything up. Now, if we were putting hooks in the back end, or if you're adding a trailer hook or something, you'd probably want to run that braid through the hook eye. But since there won't be any real, hopefully, tugging on the back end that would even risk pulling this fly apart, then none of that is necessary. Okay, we're adding in our piece of wire again. Same technique, just like the way I like to do woolly buggers is eventually tie a hackle up front, make a body, put the wire in the back, tie a hackle up front, and then bring the hackle from front to back, and then bring the wire up through it, counter wrap. Now it's about here I realized as I watched this, not when I was doing it, that the issue with tying the stem of the hackle to the tube wouldn't have been a problem up here. So I could have technically added this feather in at the end, and I wouldn't have had to have it in the way throughout this process. But there again, fly number 3. If I was making a dozen of these, by the time I got to the end, I hope I would have smoothed out the process. But I don't mind pointing it out. And if you guys are going to tie this or learn from it, there it is. You don't need to do that on the hook. Another thing that might have made this go faster. I like dubbing on the tube because I want to keep it thin. But on the body of these flies, and a lot of times on my woolly buggers, using yarn or chenille would have made a thicker body, and it would have been a lot faster than adding pieces of dubbing and wrapping. So just another point here. I used up that schlappen feather on the back 2 sections. So this is a third feather that came from the cape, and it's a little bigger. So I'm still trying to get bigger as I move forward. Okay, so I'm bored watching myself do this. I hope you fast forward past this, or you can speed through it or watch 2 videos at once. Yeah, I knew it. We put just a tad more dubbing on, get a little closer to the hook eye. That dubbing was hair Tron, and it's kind of in that beige color. And I use a lot of that. I like that for a lot of hare's ear patterns. The bellies of nymphs seem to be a color similar to this. So. All right, so get a couple of half hitches on there so things don't come undone. In a perfect world, I would just be tying that feather in now. And in this case, we're using the rotary feature again. I've done a little bit of each. I grew up without rotary, and I'm comfortable not using it, but it sure is convenient as long as you avoid the hook point. And I can't be certain I didn't. I think right there I may have nicked the hook point. But I don't think it's a concern because yeah, and the stem of this feather wasn't as strong as the last one because it kind of broke when the wire crossed it, and dropping the hackle pliers kind of finished it off. So I think I got a little lucky there, getting through that without having that come undone. But again, the wire should hold everything in place. And that's me shortening up the thread so I can use my little trick and trap it against the bobbin. That was on camera, so that's a little better. Incidentally, you'll see me snipping this wire out. I tried to helicopter that thing out, and that's some good wire. I couldn't do it. Not without, I guess, bending the hook or pulling something way harder than I wanted to. All right, so we'll pin everything back a little bit. I have most of the fibers trying to go up and down. And now here I took the rest of that olive marabou feather, and I saw this done, and I like it a lot. I cut sections, maybe a 1/4 inch long like that, 3/8 of an inch long, and I'll lay one on top of the other, preen them all together. And when you pull them together, you can cut that 3/8 of an inch or so off of there, so the stem's all gone, and you've got a nice bundle of fibers. So I put about 3 of those bundles together. There I was pulling some of the extra fuzz out of the tips, and I'm going to tie these guys on top. So this is kind of a cross hand wrap. Drop the thread on the other side. I made fun of somebody doing that one time, and I didn't realize how often I do it. All right, so everything's kind of in place, and did the same thing. Got a bundle of white together. We're looking at the bottom. I didn't cross hand that one. Grabbed the butts and kind of held on to them. All right, so everything's in place. I think pretty much, I think it was Helen Shaw who said about 3 wraps will hold almost anything. So in most situations, I think that's what we're shooting for. So I had the needle. I was going to work hard at separating these, but they kind of came out the way you would expect. So olive back on top, dampen and twist the white ones. All right, I pin the olive down. And you're probably not supposed to see that I trapped a couple of olive fibers there in the bottom too, but I don't think the fish will care much about that. All right, so I kind of have a head that's starting to take shape there a little bit. We're going to put eyes on this, so I need just something nice and solid. And this is kind of oval shape, so it should lend itself to using stick-on eyes. But since I'm going to add eyes, I want the base to kind of soak in. Why I didn't just go right after that with a brush, I'm not sure. But instead I brushed the thread and wrapped it around. So here, this was a cut and then a new take because I had to let that glue dry a little bit. All right, we'll come back to where the throat would be, and we're going to add a little pinch of Red Marabou here. I think a little red or a little yellow in the bottom of these patterns really adds something to the fly. I heard somebody in a video refer to that once as adds killing power. But we don't kill any of these fish, so I'm not sure I want to say it that way. All right, so we're getting there. I know this video is a little longer than most, but like I said, you can click around, and if you're impatient, now as a lefty, when you wrap the most of these threads naturally flatten out, so I had to give it an extra spin right there. Hey, and finally a whip finish with nothing in the way. So I kind of did two because I went front to back, and then I'll go back to front here. If you finish a whip finish in the front, the smallest, tightest loop is in the front, and everything, the other thread is pulled underneath. If you go the other way, some of it kind of comes out on top, and it probably isn't as strong. All right, so here we are. This marker's awesome. I found that somewhere. I may have stolen it from one of the kids, but it's red on one end and brown on the other, which is kind of like the perfect combination for a lot of these flies. And I only have to ever find one marker. I am going to cover that up with eyes glue, but all right, so here, almost off camera, I wish I had done this a little better. I'm coming in to snip out the center of the feathers we left back there for the tail. I don't know how much the fish are going to care about that, but I think it looks pretty cool. All right, so there are our eyes. 8mm, sticky on one side. We'll bring it in with the needle, kind of get it in place. Once the first one gets set in place, then lining the second one up with my fingers is kind of easier. I think I cut some of this away because I didn't want to bore you guys with, but I'm filling it in with UV cement. If you guys like epoxy, use epoxy. But here we're doing a little UV. I like to get it down around the hook, the shank of the hook, around the eye, and then I like to overlap, curl it around the eyes just a little bit. Make sure your eye's clear before you hit it with the light because it's pretty hard to get that out of there later. All right, so we'll hold it in place. Hit it with the light. Lord knows what UV light does to fingernails, but we're doing it. And I did that a couple more times to fill in the top and bottom. You can see where it kind of, that wasn't me being sloppy. That was on purpose. I overlapped or wrapped it around the eyes and then hardened it. Again, top and bottom in the front, kind of making almost like those plastic skulls that you buy and push over the front. You know, trying to create that all one piece thing. Then when I'm all done, I hit it with the Sally Hansen's, and that smooths things out because I am a little OCD, and having those lines and those bumps and whatever would bother me. So there we go. We gave it a good coat. After it dries, I'd probably give it one more just so it's as pretty as can be. Even though the rest of this fly is like really ugly. But I'm gonna fish a few of these. Like I said, I've done the tube fly version without the hook, and um, this was putting it all together. I don't know how much additional movement I'm gonna get out of this. If I come up with any enhancements, I might release another video. But thanks if you hung in there throughout the video and you're seeing what you see now. Thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about me, look me up on Amazon.